Ibn Arabi said, "You can identify a Wali, a friend of God, not by their words, but by the quality of their silence." Most people miss them entirely. By the end of this, you will carry a precise inner instrument that lets you recognize true spiritual presence the moment it enters a room. Most people search for the Wali in the wrong places. They look for the loudest voice, the longest beard, the most dramatic miracle. Ibn Arabi, the 12th century Andalusian master, whose knowledge of the inner world has never been surpassed, said the opposite is true. The Wali is most visible precisely when they are not speaking. Silence is not the absence of something. In Ibn Arabi's framework, silence is a condition, like water pressure, like atmospheric weight. You can feel it before you understand it, and once you learn to read it, you cannot unread it. Here is the method. Not as a theory, as a living instrument, you can use it. Samt al-Waqar, the silence of gravity. This is the first and most foundational sign. Samt al-Waqar means the silence of inner weight, a stillness that has mass to it. When a Wali is quiet, the air in the room changes, not dramatically, not theatrically, subtly, the way barometric pressure drops before rain. Most people's silence is just the absence of talking. They are quiet on the outside, but loudly active on the inside, planning, judging, rehearsing their next sentence. You can feel that restlessness even when no words come out. The body gives it away. The eyes move too much. The hands find small tasks. The posture leans slightly forward, waiting for its turn. The Wali's silence is different. It has no forward lean. It is not waiting for anything. It rests completely in the present moment without needing it to change. Ibn Arabi called this wika, a word that carries the meaning of gravitas, of settled weight, of something that does not need to prove its own existence. The trap most people fall into is mistaking depression for wicker. A person who has given up on life can also sit very still. But depression collapses inward. Waqar expands outward. One shrinks the room. The other enlarges it. The exit, the way you move from ordinary silence to samt al-Waqar, is not effort. It is the slow dissolution of the need to be seen. As long as you still need your silence to be noticed, it is performance. Waqar begins the moment silence becomes genuinely private, even in public. Samt al-Haya, the silence of sacred shame. Haya is one of the most misunderstood words in Islamic spiritual vocabulary. It is usually translated as modesty or shyness. But in Ibn Arabi's use, Haya is something far more precise. It is the silence that comes from standing too close to something holy and knowing you have no right to speak. When a person has genuine Haya, their silence is not social. It is not the silence of someone who does not know what to say. It is the silence of someone who knows exactly what could be said and chooses not to say it because the moment is too sacred for words. You recognize this silence because it makes you feel reverent without knowing why. A person with Samt al-Haya walks into a conversation, and something in you automatically lowers its own volume. You do not know what happened. You only know that suddenly you are speaking more carefully than you were a moment ago. The trap here is that religious performance can look exactly like Haya from the outside. The person who goes quiet at the name of God in a visible, studied way, that is not Haya. That is theater. Real Haya is unconscious. The person does not know they are doing it. If they know they are doing it, it has already become something else. The difference Ibn Arabi points to is this. Haya produces stillness in others as a byproduct. Performance produces observation in others as its goal. One creates an atmosphere. The other creates an audience. Samt al-Ilm, the silence of knowing. This is the silence that the most dangerous pretenders can almost, but never quite, replicate. Samt al-ilm is the silence of someone who already knows. Not someone who is thinking. Not someone who is searching. Someone who has arrived at an answer and is deciding whether the moment deserves it. You feel this silence as a kind of pressure, like standing next to someone reading a letter that contains information about you. There is knowledge in the air. You can sense it without accessing it. Ibn Arabi wrote that the true Wali carries an interior library that was not built from books. It was built from hal, spiritual states lived through completely, not studied from a distance. Every state a person has genuinely passed through becomes a form of knowing that lives in the body, not the mind. That knowing produces a particular quality of silence, loaded, patient, unhurried. The trap is that intellectual scholars can produce a similar silence. A person who has read everything and forgotten nothing can also sit with quiet confidence. But the silence of book knowledge has a subtle edge to it, a readiness to deploy, a faint anticipation of being asked. The silence of Samt al-ilm has no edge. It does not need to be asked. It is not waiting to perform. It simply is. The exit from intellectual silence into true Samt al-ilm requires something most scholars resist. It requires passing through states that cannot be read about, grief that dismantles you, love that humiliates you, loss that leaves no argument intact. The Wali's knowledge was paid for. That payment shows in the silence. Samt al-muhabba, the silence of love without need. Most love is loud. It announces itself. It seeks confirmation. It asks, even subtly, do you see what I feel? Do you feel what I feel? Even spiritual love, in its early stages, carries this need. The student who loves the teacher desperately wants the teacher to know it. Samt al-muhabba is different. It is the silence of a love that has burned past the need for return. Ibn Arabi described this as the station where the lover stops asking anything of the beloved, including acknowledgement. The love becomes structural, like gravity. It does not announce itself. It simply operates. When you are near someone who carries this silence, you feel unexpectedly safe. Not because they have said anything comforting, not because they have promised anything, but because their attention toward you carries no hidden transaction. They want nothing from you. That kind of wanting nothing is extraordinarily rare. Most people feel it as warmth without a source. The trap is numbness. A person who has simply stopped caring can also appear to want nothing. Emotional shutdown and mahabba can look identical from the outside, but shutdown produces distance. Mahabba produces nearness. Shutdown makes you feel unseen. Mahabba makes you feel more visible than you expected, and more accepted than you deserve. Ibn Arabi's distinction is precise. He said the silence of true love makes the other person feel that they have known for a very long time, even in a first meeting. That recognition is not manufactured. You cannot fake it. If it is there, it is real. If it has to be performed, it is not mahabba. Samt al-fana, the silence of self-erasure. This is the deepest silence. And it is the most difficult to describe because the person you are trying to describe is, in a real sense, no longer entirely present as a separate self. Fana means annihilation, not death, not depression, not dissociation. Ibn Arabi used this word to describe the state in which the ego's constant commentary, the inner voice that narrates, judges, compares, and positions, has gone quiet at the root. What remains is presence without persona. The silence of fana does not feel like absence. It feels like an arrival. Like a room where everything unnecessary has been removed, and what remains is clean and exact. People who have spent time near someone in this state often describe it afterward with the same phrase in different languages. They say, "I forgot myself." That forgetting is the sign. When your own self-consciousness dissolves in someone's presence, when you stop monitoring how you appear, stop rehearsing what you will say next, stop tracking how the conversation is going, you are near Samt al-Fana. The Wali's self-erasure becomes temporarily contagious. The trap for the observer is to confuse this with charisma. Charisma pulls attention toward the person. Fana dissolves the boundary between persons. Charisma makes you more aware of yourself in comparison. Fana makes you temporarily forget the comparison exists. And this is where Ibn Arabi places his sharpest warning. He said, "The Wali and Fana will often appear unremarkable to people who are looking for remarkable. They will seem ordinary, calm to the point of invisibility. The ego, which is always searching for its mirror, finds nothing to reflect off, and so it dismisses what it cannot use." Samt al-Adab, the silence of impeccable courtesy. Adab means courtesy, but not social courtesy, not the politeness of someone who was raised well or who fears conflict. In Ibn Arabi's vocabulary, adab is a cosmic orientation. It is the posture of a soul that knows exactly where it stands in relation to God, to creation, and to every human being in the room. The silence of adab has a particular texture. It never interrupts. Not because the person lacks confidence, but because they understand that every human being speaking is, in that moment, carrying something that deserves to complete itself. The Wali with Samt al-Adab listens the way a riverbank holds water, without resistance, without rushing it forward, without redirecting it before it is ready. You recognize this silence because it makes you feel that what you are saying matters more than you thought it did when you started saying it. You arrive at the end of your own sentence, surprised by its depth. That surprise is not yours alone. The listening drew it out of you. The trap is that trained therapists, skilled diplomats, and patient teachers can produce a version of this listening. Professionally cultivated attention can feel, for a while, like Samt al-Adab. The difference emerges over time. Professional attention has an agenda: healing, resolution, education. Samt al-Adab has no agenda. It is not moving you toward anything. It is simply with you, completely, for as long as you need. Ibn Arabi wrote that the Wali's adab toward creation is a direct reflection of their adab toward God. The way they sit with you in silence is the way they sit in prayer. There is no difference between the two postures. One continuous act of courtesy toward the Creator in every created thing. Samt al-Tawakkul, the silence of total reliance. Tawakkul means reliance on God, complete reliance. The kind that has no backup plan, no secondary anxiety, no quiet hedge against the possibility that God might not come through. Most people who use this word do not yet live in it. They aspire to it. They practice it on small things. They save their real worry for the large ones. The silence of tawakkul is the silence of someone who has genuinely released the outcome, not someone who has given up caring about outcomes. Someone who cares deeply and has placed the caring entirely in hands larger than their own. You feel this silence as an unusual steadiness. When difficulty enters the conversation, when news arrives that would normally produce anxiety, scrambling, or consolation-seeking, the person with Samt al-Tawakkul does not move, not because they are numb, not because they do not understand the weight of what was said, but because their center is anchored somewhere that the difficulty cannot reach. This steadiness is not cold. That is the crucial distinction. Cold steadiness is disconnection. Tawakkul steadiness is warm. It holds the difficulty with full acknowledgement while remaining unshaken. Like a deep-rooted tree in wind, bending at the surface, immovable at the root. The trap for those who observe this silence is to call it fatalism. The resigned person also does not scramble. But resignation has given up on meaning. Tawakkul has surrendered to meaning so completely that scrambling becomes unnecessary. One is emptiness. The other is fullness that has no room for panic. The exit into tawakkul does not come from deciding to trust God more. Ibn Arabi is precise about this. It comes from accumulating evidence through lived experience that every time you released control, something more intelligent than your control was already operating. That accumulation eventually produces a silence that does not need to be performed. It simply settles into you like sediment until it becomes the ground you stand on. Samt al-Sir, the silence of the hidden interior. This is the silence you will rarely name in the moment. You will only understand it afterward, often days later, when you find yourself still thinking about a person you barely spoke to. Sir means secret. In Sufi vocabulary, it refers to the innermost chamber of the heart, the place so deep that even the person who carries it cannot fully access it with the conscious mind. It is the place where God speaks directly, without intermediary, without translation. The silence of Sir is a silence within a silence. The Wali may be speaking, may even be laughing or engaged in ordinary conversation, and underneath all of that surface activity, there is a layer that never moves, never speaks, never enters the social exchange at all. You feel it as a depth behind the eyes, a sense that whatever is happening on the surface is not the whole story, that the real conversation is occurring somewhere you cannot hear. This is the silence that produces what people describe as a lingering presence. You leave the gathering, and the person comes with you, not as a memory of what they said, but as a felt quality that continues to operate in your chest. Ibn Arabi called this the athar, the trace. The Wali leaves a trace that continues to work on you after the physical meeting has ended. The trap for the seeker is to romanticize this, to chase the feeling of depth rather than the reality of it. Many people have learned to project mystery, to cultivate a distant, enigmatic persona that produces the sensation of hidden depth without the substance. The difference is what happens over time. Performed mystery fades. It requires maintenance. It needs new audiences. The aether of Samt al-Sir does not fade. It deepens. The longer you know the person, the more the depth reveals itself. Never fully, always genuinely. Picture a person you have met, or almost met, who made you feel, without a single dramatic gesture, that something in the room had changed when they arrived. They did not announce themselves. They did not position themselves at the center. They sat where there was space and became still. When they spoke, it was brief. Each word landed with more weight than its size suggested. When they did not speak, you found yourself speaking more carefully, as though their silence had raised the standard of what deserved to be said aloud. You left that meeting carrying something you could not name. Not information, not advice, a quality, a reminder of something you had always known but had stopped living. Days later, you were still quieter than usual, still more deliberate, still reaching, without quite knowing what you were reaching for. That is the Wali Ibn Arabi describes, not a supernatural figure, not a performer of wonders. A human being so thoroughly cleaned of self-interest that their presence alone becomes a form of teaching. Their silence is not empty. It is full of every state they have passed through, every ego demand they have refused, every moment they chose God over the approval of the room. You do not find this person by searching loudly. You find them by becoming quiet enough to notice what is already there. Ibn Arabi did not write this method for the spiritually advanced only. He wrote it because he understood that recognition requires preparation. Before you can see the Wali, you must first understand why you have been missing them. These questions are not comfortable. They are not meant to be. 1. When you enter a room, does your silence feel like wait or like waiting? Be honest. Most people's silence is a held breath before the next sentence. Waqar cannot coexist with that waiting. 2. When someone else speaks at length and you already know what you think about what they are saying, can you remain genuinely open? Or does your listening become a quiet performance of patience while your conclusion sits ready? Samt al-Adab requires that the conclusion be set aside completely, not just hidden. 3. When you are near someone you consider spiritually advanced, do you feel seen? Or do you feel assessed? If you feel assessed, ask whether that feeling is being projected from your own inner assessor. The Wali does not assess. You may be feeling your own gaze reflected back. 4. Think of the last time someone's silence made you uncomfortable. What did you do with that discomfort? Did you fill it with words? Did you perform ease? The inability to rest in another person's silence is a precise measurement of how much you still need silence to mean something about you. 5. When you pray, is there a moment, even one moment, where the inner commentary stops completely? Not where you suppress it, where it simply is not there. Ibn Arabi said that moment is the closest most people ever come to Samt al-Fana in their daily life. If you have never touched that moment, the silence of the Wali will feel alien rather than familiar. 6. After leaving a gathering, do you find yourself replaying what you said, checking it, refining it, wishing you had said something differently? That replay is the ego's quality control department. It is not wrong to have it. But notice how much of your mental life it occupies. The Wali's silence is partly the silence of someone who no longer runs that department. 7. Have you ever been in the presence of someone and felt, without explanation, that you were known? Not understood, known, deeper than understanding. If you have felt that, you have already touched the edge of what Ibn Arabi is describing. That feeling was not imagination, it was recognition, and recognition always works in both directions. Ibn Arabi did not leave his students with maps and no doors. The method for detecting the Wali begins with the same inner work that produces the Wali. You cannot recognize what you have never touched. These 3 practices open the door. The first practice is the 40-breath silence. Tonight, before any other evening activity, sit without a screen, without a book, without any task. Set no timer. Simply sit until 40 complete breaths have passed, counted silently, without rushing. The rule is this: if a thought pulls you away and you lose the count, begin again from 1. Not from where you left off, from 1. This is not meditation in the generic sense. Ibn Arabi's students used this practice specifically to begin distinguishing between the silence of the surface and the silence of the sir, the hidden interior. The surface will be noisy for the first 20 breaths. Let it be noisy. Do not fight it. Simply keep counting. What you are building is not stillness. You are building the ability to remain present inside noise without being consumed by it. That ability is the foundation of every form of silence described in this teaching. The second practice is the 1-hour embargo on first responses. For 1 week, impose this single rule on yourself. When someone says something that produces an immediate reaction in you, agreement, disagreement, emotion, judgment, do not express that reaction for at least 1 hour. You do not suppress it. You hold it. You carry it with you for 60 minutes and then ask, is this still what I feel, or was it a surface movement? Most reactions do not survive the hour. They were weather, not climate. The ones that remain after 60 minutes are worth speaking. Ibn Arabi called the impulse to respond immediately the nafs rushing to secure its position. The 1-hour embargo is not about becoming passive. It is about learning to tell the difference between a response that comes from your center and a reflex that comes from your edge. The third practice is the deliberate seeking of overlooked presence. Once a week, enter a gathering, a family dinner, a Friday prayer, a small social meeting, with one specific intention. Look for the person no one is looking at, not the performer, not the most animated voice, the one who is present but peripheral, the one whose silence is not demanding attention. Sit near them if you can. Do not initiate conversation immediately. Simply be near the quality of their silence and notice what it does to your own interior. You are not looking for a Wali behind every quiet person. You are training your sensitivity, the same sensitivity Ibn Arabi said is the first instrument of recognition. Most people spend their entire lives in gatherings looking only at what is loudest. This practice reverses that habit one gathering at a time. Ibn Arabi wrote the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, his great work on inner knowledge, not as a book for scholars. He wrote it as a map for anyone serious enough to use it. He said the friends of God are never absent from the earth. In every generation, in every city, among every people, they are present. Quietly, continuously, holding something open that would otherwise close. The reason most people never find them is not that they are hidden. It is that the seeker's own noise drowns out the signal. The ego goes looking for a Wali the way it goes looking for everything else, loudly, transactionally, with a list of expected features. And the Wali, who has no interest in being found by the ego, simply remains invisible to it. What this teaching asks of you is not a new search. It asks for a new quality of attention. Slower, quieter, less interested in being impressive and more interested in being accurate. That shift from loud seeking to quiet noticing is not just a method for finding the Wali. It is itself the beginning of becoming someone whose silence carries weight. Every time you choose presence over performance, something in you becomes more legible to the people who can read that language. Every time you hold a reaction for an hour instead of releasing it immediately, you build one more layer of the inner gravity that Ibn Arabi called waqar. Every time you sit near the overlooked person and simply notice, you are training the exact instrument that will one day recognize what most people walk past without seeing. The Wali is not a destination. The Wali is a direction. And the moment you begin moving in that direction, something in the universe, Ibn Arabi believed, begins moving toward you. In the comments, name the silence you recognize most in yourself today. Not the one you wish you had, but the one you actually live in right now. Spiritual honesty is where this work begins.